Hello everyone, this is Professor Patterns here, and in this video we're going to be going over the data interview. Now, this is usually going to be the interview process that you'll see quite often in data roles such as data scientist or machine learning engineer, and sometimes in data analyst positions as well. Now, usually it would start with a recruiter call. So during this time, you might get a call from one of the recruiters from the company or an external recruiter. And the goal in this call is usually about 30 minutes to try to understand what are your skills and requirements and how they align with the role or not. A lot of the times, I would say for this interview, it's pretty simple. All you would do is just make sure that you have the job description open. And whenever you're talking about your background and experience, you try to link it as much as you can to that job description. Now, the next interview is the one with the hiring manager. Now, this is the more important one because this is usually going to be about 45 minutes to an hour of a conversation with the actual hiring manager for that role. Now, they're not going to be really deep or heavy theoretical questions a lot of the times in these interviews. It's usually just going to be more of a conversation that the hiring manager will have with you. They're just trying to understand your background, your skills, the different projects that you worked on, and all of those different things. You'll start off this role with maybe around a 10 to 15-minute conversation where the hiring manager is introducing the role as well as the company. Then they'll ask you to introduce yourself, and this is where you would give maybe a 2 or 3 minute introduction about your skills as well as your experience. And then the hiring manager might ask you some follow up questions based on things that you've talked about in your projects. So, typical questions during this stage are things like, "Hey, can you tell me about a project that you worked on?" Or, what were the different challenges that you encountered when you worked through a project? They might ask you what metrics you used when you were trying to evaluate the performance of your project as well. So, they're here just trying to understand your level of technical knowledge. But again, they're not asking you questions like, explain the back propagation chain rule process in detail or anything like that. No, it's just looking at things in your resume and then just asking you questions based on that. Now, if that conversation goes well, the next state is a take home assignment. Now, usually this would be something where a hiring manager might just give you some data set. It might be a small or a mid-sized data set, and they might ask you to create some sort of a regression or a classification model. I would say 80 or 90% of the times is usually one of those two types of models. And your goal would be to take in that data set, look at the requirements. You'll are free to pretty much use any sort of tool that you'd like to use. So in most cases, a lot of people will just stick to using Jupyter notebooks or Google Colab notebooks, and that's perfectly okay. So you would take in the data set, load that in, and then create a bunch of different solutions for that problem that they're trying to solve. Now, I'll go over what would be the most ideal way to solve this take home assignment, and I can link the video here to this description. For now, I just want you to know that this is the part of the process where you'll have a couple of days to actually work through the problem that they give you. Now, after the take home assignment, there usually is a panel interview. So, this might not just be with the hiring manager, it might just be multiple people. So, maybe it might be a team of like 3 or 4 people that are going to really evaluate your performance on the take home assignment. So, they might ask you some questions on the design choices that you use for the models. They might ask you for why or your reasoning as to why you selected maybe something or a particular type of metric that you want to evaluate. Again, they're not here to watch you fail, they're just here to understand your thought process and reasoning. And then finally, you have the offer stage. This is the final stage of that overall interview process. Now, the interview would differ depending on which companies that you're going to be applying to. So, for example, if you're going to be applying to like the really high tech FANG companies or something, then chances are that between the recruiter call and the hiring manager, you might have maybe like a coding assignment, maybe like a code screen or something. Where they might ask you some lead code type of questions. Usually they're going to be easy or mid-level questions. You might also go through another round here between the hiring manager and a take-home assignment, where it will be some sort of a paired programming interview where the hiring manager might ask you to share your screen and then you step through a problem together. It really depends on what kind of organization that you're really going to be applying to. So, but usually this is going to be the general outline of the interview process. Now, what are some of the main skills that are going to be tested? These depend on whether or not you're applying to a data scientist role, a machine learning engineer role, or a data analyst role, because a data analyst role, they'll really want to focus a lot more on your SQL programming. So they might ask you maybe something like medium or hard level questions on SQL. Versus if you're applying to a machine learning engineer role, they might ask you a little bit more questions on Python. So not just the basics, but they'll want to focus a little bit more on things like algorithms, data structures, those kind of things. They just want to know if you have the ability to create complex algorithms and also think about things like time and space complexity and those kind of things. For a general data science interview, usually I would say that it's going to be more of like easy to mid-level Python, easy to mid-level SQL. A little bit more emphasis on projects to see if the projects that you worked on are going to be relevant to the role, as well as the domain that the company is going to be in. So, for example, if you have a lot of projects that are going to be based on stock market predictions, finance, those kind of things, and the company that you're applying to is also a financial company, then that would be a win. Versus if you had a lot of projects that were maybe in natural language processing, in journalism, and then you're applying to a completely different field, maybe um, in healthcare or something, then that experience might not really exactly translate too well. So relevant projects to whatever the role is always going to be a plus. Now, something else that they might also ask you during the interview is maybe like a behavioral question. So, usually I would say STAR methodology is perfect for this. So the situation, task, action, and response. They might ask you questions like, "Tell me about a time when you disagreed with a coworker or disagreed with the manager, and how did you react to that?" or something like that. So, there's tons of resources available online on how you can answer behavioral questions. These do come up from time to time. Usually, it might be in the hiring manager interview, usually the first interview that you'd be in. It might also come in after the take home assignment. So when you have the panel interview, so you might have some people maybe from the product team. They might ask you a question like this, which is a little bit more behavioral. And the last thing that they'll also want you to have is some enthusiasm for the role. So it doesn't hurt to just do some research on the company. So, for example, imagine that you're applying to a startup company. It's always going to be beneficial if you just do some prior research on the company, the type of role, the type of problems that they deal with. It's going to be a major plus if you can do some research on the company and then maybe even create a demo project for the company, which you can then present in your call with the hiring manager. That would go over really well. So you don't need to have this, but if you have some enthusiasm for the role where you're talking about similar problems that you encountered, or you're just really speaking to the type of problems that they would encounter within that industry, that's always going to be a plus. And that's pretty much it for the overall data interview process. Uh, it really depends on the organization that you're applying to. And in the next video, I'm going to go over where you can find questions and how you can see the exact interview process depending on exactly which company that you're applying to. For now, that's it. Thank you for tuning in. If you're new to the channel, then please like. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. It helps the channel out. If you want me to cover any future videos or any ideas that you might have, then please leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll make sure I create a video on that. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.